The night was still, the kind of stillness that makes even small sounds echo louder than they should. The settlement slept under a blanket of faint moonlight, and only the guards moved, their eyes scanning the shadows, their ears tuned to the smallest rustle of wind. For them, night patrols had become routine. Quiet walks, sharp eyes, and the occasional growl from the cages where predator cubs were kept. The cubs were usually restless at night, their sharp little claws scratched at the metal bars, their teeth gnawed against wood, and their young voices often rose in cries or growls. The guards had grown used to it. In fact, they often said that the cubs' noises were a sign of order, proof that everything was normal inside the camp. But this night was different. When the first two guards reached the cages, they froze in place. Silence. No scratching, no growling, no restless shuffling. The row of cages that normally rattled with noise was quiet. Too quiet. Their hands instinctively tightened on their weapons. They stepped closer, lanterns raised. What they saw made their blood run cold. The cages were open, every single one of them. Doors swung wide, locks hanging broken, the inside floors empty. The cubs were gone. For a moment, neither guard spoke. They simply stared, their hearts pounding so loudly it felt as if the sound alone would wake the settlement. Then one guard finally whispered, voice trembling, "They're gone. All of them." The other shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. "That's not possible. They were here at sunset. I checked the locks myself, but the proof was in front of them." Panic set in. If the cubs had escaped, it was disaster. If they had been stolen, it was worse. Rival clans would see it as weakness. The future warriors of the settlement, the next generation of their strength, had vanished without a sound. The alarm was raised. Horns blew through the night air, echoing against stone walls. Fires flared to life as torches were lit. Warriors stumbled from their shelters, weapons in hand, ready for attack. Elders emerged too, their expressions dark and stern. Within minutes, the quiet night turned into chaos. The cages were inspected, locks studied, tracks examined. But no signs of a break-in could be found. No claw marks of an enemy, no scent of strangers. It was as though the cubs had simply decided to walk out on their own. Warriors barked orders. Search parties were sent into the darkness beyond the settlement. Guards combed through every corner, every shadow, every possible hiding place. Voices rose in fear and frustration. They could be anywhere. They must have fled into the forest. No, someone took them. This is a trap. Theories clashed as quickly as words could be spoken. Some believed a rival clan had slipped in, stolen the cubs, and left without a trace. Others believed the cubs themselves had broken free, too wild to remain caged. And some whispered of something stranger, something none dared voice too loudly. Among the crowd, one elder's voice cut through the noise. "If we do not find them before dawn, we lose them forever." That single line sent fear deeper into everyone's chest. The cubs were the future. Without them, their strength would fade. Losing them was not just a mistake. It was a threat to the survival of the whole settlement. But as the panic spread, there was one place no one thought to check. Not yet. At the edge of the camp stood a small shelter, built for the human woman who had lived quietly among them. She had never sought attention, never asked for power, and many still questioned why she remained. She was tolerated, not trusted, and yet even as warriors stormed through the camp, no one imagined that the cubs could be with her. Why would they be? She was not one of them. She held no claws, no authority, no place in their order. The guards split into groups, some searching the forest edge, others circling the camp walls. They followed broken twigs, sniffed at faint trails, shouted into the night. But no answers came, only silence. The human woman inside her small shelter heard the commotion. She lit no fire, spoke no word. She simply sat in the stillness, aware of the movement outside, aware of the panic that grew with every passing minute. Then, in the distance, one guard paused. His eyes caught something unusual, a faint glimmer of eyes reflecting moonlight near the woman's shelter. He stepped closer, his grip tightening on his spear. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. The cubs, all of them, not running wild in the forest, not hiding in shadows. They were gathered quietly, seated in a neat line outside the human's door. No snarling, no fighting, no fear, just silence, as if they were waiting. The guard's heart pounded. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. Then he called for the others. Warriors arrived, their heavy footsteps thundering against the ground. They stopped when they saw the sight for themselves. Disbelief washed over their faces. Some gasped, some cursed, some simply stood frozen. The cubs, fierce by nature, had not chosen freedom in the wild. They had not chosen to return to their kind. They had chosen her. The human woman opened her door then, slowly, quietly, as if she had known all along what awaited outside. She looked at the cubs, then at the warriors, and said nothing. She didn't need to. The truth was already clear. No one expected this. No one had imagined it. The night that began in panic ended in silence again, but this silence was different. It was heavy with questions, with disbelief, with a new kind of fear, not of danger, but of change. For the first time, warriors and elders stood face to face with something they could not explain. The cubs had escaped their cages, but instead of running free, they had chosen the human, and nothing would ever be the same again. The sound of horns still echoed through the night air as the search began. Guards, shaken by the empty cages, scattered in every direction. Their torches painted flickering shapes on walls and ground, making shadows look like enemies waiting to strike. Warriors hurried behind them, weapons gleaming in the firelight, their voices sharp with urgency. The cubs were missing, and no one knew how or why. Fear wrapped itself around the camp like smoke. The settlement had always trusted its cages. The bars were strong, the locks heavy, the ground marked so that any trail could be followed. To see all of them standing wide open felt like betrayal. The guards who had found the cages could not shake the image. The silence where there should have been growls, the emptiness where there should have been life. Now, as the search spread, whispers ran faster than footsteps. Could they have been stolen? One voice muttered. Impossible. We would have heard, another argued. Then how did they escape? Someone helped them. Theories grew like weeds, each one darker than the last. Some imagined a rival clan had broken through the defenses without a sound. Others feared betrayal from inside the camp. A few even wondered if the cubs had turned against their kind altogether, though no one dared say it too loudly. Every path was checked, every bush examined. Guards bent low, searching for tracks in the dirt. They found marks, but they were confusing, small claw prints in too many directions, as if the cubs had scattered and vanished. Warriors followed them, but the trails stopped suddenly, fading into the night air. It made no sense. Tracks always led somewhere. These seemed to lead nowhere. The elders gathered in the center of the camp, their cloaks drawn tightly around them against the night air. Their voices were sharp, heavy with anger and worry. They demanded answers, pressed the guards for details, questioned the strength of the locks. Some shouted over each other, their words filled with blame. You were not watching closely enough. The cages were not secure. This is negligence. But deep down, each elder knew the truth. This was no simple mistake. Too much had happened too perfectly. Every cage open, every cub gone, no sound, no warning. It was not the work of chance. Something greater was at play. Meanwhile, the warriors sharpened their weapons in haste. They could not risk weakness. If a rival clan had done this, an attack could come at any moment. Better to be ready, better to show strength than to be caught unprepared. Still, the unease lingered. Search groups pushed farther, beyond the settlement walls, into the edge of the forest. The night was thick with mist, the trees whispering as the wind moved through them. Every sound seemed louder, the crack of a twig, the flutter of wings, the rush of leaves. Guards moved cautiously, their torches lighting only small circles, in the endless dark. But no cubs were found, no cries, no footsteps, no shapes darting between the trees. It was as though they had vanished into thin air. Back inside the camp, families gathered near the fires, fear showing in their eyes. The cubs were more than just children of predators. They were symbols of the future, proof of survival. Without them, hope would wither. Whispers of doubt spread quickly, carried from one anxious voice to another. What if they were taken? What if they never return? What if the rival clans know already? The elders silenced the voices with raised hands, but they could not silence the fear inside themselves. The human woman, sitting quietly in her shelter at the edge of the camp, listened from a distance. She could hear the footsteps rushing past, the shouts of orders, the clash of blades being readied. She could hear the panic beneath the noise, but she did not move. She stayed still, calm, as if she knew her place in this storm was not to join it, but to wait. Outside, a group of warriors argued fiercely. Some wanted to search deeper into the forest. Others demanded they strengthen the camp walls first. The disagreement grew louder, and with it, suspicion. "What if someone inside did this?" one warrior hissed. "You mean betrayal?" another snapped. "Think about it. Who could open every cage without being seen, without leaving a trace?" The word betrayal hit hard. No one wanted to believe it, yet no one could deny it seemed possible. The idea spread quickly, planting distrust even among those who had fought side by side. Eyes narrowed, voices hardened, bonds strained. But while suspicion grew, answers did not. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher, then began to fall. The torches burned low, yet the cubs were still nowhere to be found. The search parties returned, one by one, each reporting failure. No bodies, no signs, no sound, only emptiness. The elders stood in silence, their faces grim. For all their wisdom, they had no explanation. Warriors looked at each other uneasily, their strength shaken by what they could not understand. Guards lowered their weapons, frustration clear in their eyes. It was as though the cubs had disappeared from the world itself, and yet even in that moment of despair, the truth was closer than anyone realized. Because while they searched the forests, the walls, the shadows of the camp, they overlooked the one place the cubs had gone. The place no one thought to check because no one believed it possible. At the edge of the camp, beyond the noise and the chaos, the cubs sat quietly outside, the human woman's shelter, waiting, watching, trusting. But the settlement did not know this yet. For them, the search was still unfinished, the questions still unanswered, and the fear still growing heavier with every heartbeat. The night stretched on, filled with tension, suspicion, and silence. Warriors sharpened blades they might never need. Elders whispered about enemies that might not exist. Guards swore to strengthen locks that no longer mattered. And all the while, the truth sat quietly in the shadows, unnoticed, waiting to be discovered. The search had begun with certainty. Certainty that the cubs were lost, that they had been stolen, that danger was near. But as the hours dragged on, certainty faded into confusion, confusion into frustration, and frustration into something far more dangerous, doubt, and doubt once planted could change everything. The night had stretched long, and the settlement was weary from endless searching. Warriors returned empty-handed, their boots heavy with dust, their tempers sharp from frustration. Guards carried torches that burned low, their flames flickering in the restless wind. The elders grew tired of hearing the same reports repeated again and again. No tracks, no sound, no sign of the cubs. The camp was boiling with tension. Some shouted, some accused, and some simply fell silent, unable to understand how a whole group of cubs could vanish without a trace. It seemed impossible. Yet the impossible had already happened. The cages were open and the cubs were gone. Then, as the hours dragged closer to dawn, one guard strayed farther from the chaos. His steps were slower, his eyes tired, but something urged him to look, one last time. His torchlight swept across the edges of the camp, the part where most never bothered to search. That was when he noticed it. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks. In the pale moonlight, he saw a row of shapes, small and still, sitting in perfect formation. He froze, heart pounding. Slowly, he lifted his torch higher. The warm glow revealed the truth, and his breath caught in his throat. The cubs, every single one of them. They were not hiding, not running, not scattered in fear. They sat quietly in a neat line outside the human woman's shelter, their eyes reflecting the torchlight. They weren't growling, weren't fighting, weren't restless. They simply waited, calm and patient, as though the chaos of the night had nothing to do with them. The guard's chest tightened. He could hardly believe what he saw. For a long moment, he stood frozen, afraid to even blink in case the vision vanished. Then, with trembling hands, he raised his horn and blew. The sharp sound echoed through the camp. Warriors rushed toward him, weapons ready, expecting danger. Elders hurried behind, demanding answers. But when they arrived, they too stopped in their tracks. Silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something deliberate. The cubs remained seated in their perfect line, tails curled neatly, heads lifted with quiet dignity. They did not move when the warriors approached. They did not flinch when the elders muttered. Their gaze remained fixed on the wooden door of the human's shelter. It was not an accident. It was a choice. Whispers rippled through the crowd of warriors. "Why are they here?" one muttered. "How did they get out?" asked another. "Did she lure them?" An elder growled under his breath, but no one dared step forward. No one dared break the line of cubs that guarded her door. The human woman had not yet emerged. Her shelter was simple, a single lantern glowing faintly inside. She had not raised alarm, had not called attention, had not claimed anything. And yet, the cubs sat for her, as if she were their alpha. The sight unsettled everyone. For generations, cubs had looked only to their kind for guidance, discipline, and strength. Yet here they were, gathered at the door of someone who was not predator, not warrior, not elder, just human. The elders whispered fiercely among themselves. Some demanded she be brought out and questioned immediately. Others hissed that disturbing her now would show weakness. Warriors exchanged uncertain looks, their hands tightening on their weapons, though none could explain what good a blade would do in this strange moment. The cubs themselves remained calm, unbothered by the noise around them. Their breathing was steady, their bodies relaxed, their eyes unafraid. It was not the calm of creatures trapped or tricked. It was the calm of choice. Finally, the wooden door creaked open. The woman stepped outside. Her movements were slow, unhurried, as if she had expected this. The lantern behind her cast a soft glow that framed her in the pale light of dawn. She looked down at the cubs, who immediately straightened, their ears flicking forward, their tails brushing the ground with quiet excitement. Then she lifted her gaze to the warriors and elders who surrounded the scene. She did not speak. She did not raise her hands or make demands. She simply stood there, silent, calm, her presence steady like stone in the middle of a raging river. The warriors shifted uneasily. Some avoided her eyes. Others glared with suspicion, but even their anger faltered in the face of the sight before them. The cubs had chosen her, not through words, not through force, but through their silent devotion. One elder finally broke the silence. "This cannot be," he hissed. "They are ours, not hers. She must have tricked them." But even as he said the words, doubt hung heavy in his voice. No trick could explain the peace on the cubs' faces, the trust in their eyes, the way they sat so willingly in her presence. Another warrior whispered, almost to himself, "Look at them." "They're not afraid. They're loyal." The word hung in the air like a spark. Loyal. A word rarely used for cubs, who were known for their wild tempers and restless spirits. Yet here they were, as loyal as soldiers before a commander. The woman did not answer the accusations. She did not try to explain. She simply reached out a hand and let it rest on the nearest cub's head. The cub leaned into her touch, eyes closing in contentment. The crowd gasped. Some elders stepped back, shaken by what they had just seen. "The warriors muttered, voices rising in confusion, but none could deny what their eyes told them. The cubs had not been stolen. They had not escaped to seek freedom. They had not been forced. They had chosen her. The search, the panic, the chaos of the night, it all crumbled in the face of this truth. The settlement stood frozen, unable to decide whether to call it betrayal, miracle, or something else entirely. But deep down, everyone knew this was no ordinary event. It was deliberate. It was destiny. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of gold and pale blue, the cubs remained seated at her door, refusing to move. The woman stood quietly among them, her figure calm against the rising sun. The warriors, once so quick to sharpen weapons, lowered their blades. The elders, once so quick to argue, fell silent. Even the guards, who had run themselves ragged through the night, could only watch in disbelief. The truth was undeniable. The cubs had escaped their cages, but not to flee. They had escaped to find her. And in finding her, they had revealed a bond that no one had expected. A bond stronger than chains, stronger than fear, stronger than command. For the first time, the settlement saw the human woman not as an outsider, not as a burden, but as something more, something they could not yet name, but could no longer ignore. The quiet line of cubs was not just a moment. It was a message, and though no one spoke it aloud, every heart in that gathering knew. Nothing in their world would ever be the same again. The night had been restless, filled with alarm and fear, but now the settlement stood frozen in disbelief. Warriors, elders, and guards circled the small shelter, their faces lit by the first pale hints of dawn. None of them had imagined the search would end this way. They had expected claws, blood, or betrayal. Instead, they found silence, an unshakable, deliberate silence that cut deeper than any battle cry. The cubs did not scatter when surrounded. They did not shrink back from the sight of sharp weapons or harsh voices. They remained seated in their quiet line, eyes steady, tails brushing lightly against the ground. Their attention was not on the crowd, but on the human woman who stood calmly before them. It was as though the rest of the world had ceased to exist. The warriors, known for their confidence and strength, shifted uneasily. They exchanged glances, but no words came. Their blades, drawn in fear of an enemy raid, now felt heavy and useless in their hands. This was no enemy they faced, no rival clan, no threat they understood. It was something stranger, something they could neither fight nor deny. The elders were less silent. Their voices rose in sharp whispers and low growls of argument. "This is unnatural," one said. "It cannot be trusted." Another countered, "Perhaps it is a sign. Perhaps we are too blind to see what they see." The arguments twisted and tangled, but none reached a conclusion. Every explanation collapsed under the simple, undeniable truth before them. The cubs had chosen. The guards, who had first sounded the alarm, stood with uncertain eyes. They had run themselves ragged through the night, searching in panic. Now, seeing the cubs here, they were torn between relief and confusion. Their duty had been to protect the settlement, but how could they protect it from a choice freely made? They glanced at one another as though hoping someone else would step forward and explain what none of them could. Meanwhile, the woman remained still. She had not stepped out to defend herself, nor to argue. She had not raised her voice or made a demand. She simply acknowledged the cubs with a glance, her calm gaze softening as one leaned closer to her leg. Her hand rested briefly on its head, and the cub's eyes fluttered closed in contentment. The moment was so small, yet it carried more weight than the loudest of speeches. That quiet gesture unsettled the elders more than anything else. "See how they respond," one hissed. "She has ensnared them." Another snapped, "No, look at them. There is no fear. They are at peace." The words hung uncomfortably in the air. Peace was not a thing their kind had often associated with strength. To them, cubs were meant to grow fierce, to fight, to survive. Yet here they were, stronger in their calm than ever they had been in their cages. The warriors watched, their doubt deepening. Some remembered the cubs' wild restlessness inside the cages, the constant pacing, the endless growls, the way they bit at the bars as though the metal itself were an enemy. Now, in front of the human, all that wildfire seemed tempered, not broken, but refined. They were not weak, not tamed, but steady. The crowd began to murmur louder, voices blending into a storm of fear, anger, and wonder. What did it mean for their future if cubs chose a human over their own kind? What did it say about their strength, their traditions, their leadership? The woman did not answer them. She did not need to. Her silence was not weakness. It was presence. Young warrior, braver than the rest, finally took a step forward. He raised his blade slightly, not in attack, but as though testing the reaction. The cubs turned their heads toward him in unison, their eyes glowing with a quiet warning. They did not growl, but their message was clear. Do not threaten her. The warrior faltered, his courage breaking under the weight of their gaze, and lowered his blade again. The elders fell silent at that sight. No words could disguise what had just happened. The cubs, who once took orders from them, now guarded. Someone else, without fear, without hesitation, without command. Still, suspicion lingered. "Perhaps she used some trick," one elder said weakly. "Perhaps she feeds them something, or whispers spells in the dark." But the words sounded hollow even to him. Everyone knew the truth was simpler, and that made it harder to accept. The cubs had not been tricked. They had chosen her freely. The woman bent down then, meeting the eyes of the smallest cub at the end of the line. She did not speak. She simply offered her open hand. The cub stepped forward, touching its nose to her palm. The gesture was so natural, so filled with trust, that a hush fell over the entire gathering. The warriors looked to their elders for guidance, but the elders had no answers. They had lived long, seen many seasons of battle and blood, but never had they witnessed loyalty like this. Their teachings had never prepared them for it. For a moment, the settlement seemed divided between two worlds: the old world of cages, commands, and force, and the new world unfolding before them, where trust was freely given, not taken. The silence stretched long, broken only by the soft breaths of the cubs and the faint rustle of wind through the settlement. The woman stood unmoving, her hand still open, her presence unshaken. Then, slowly, a shift began. One by one, the warriors lowered their blades completely. Their shoulders eased, though uncertainty still shadowed their eyes. The guards loosened, their grips on their torches, their hands no longer trembling. Even the elders, though unwilling to admit defeat, began to fall quieter, their arguments losing strength. The truth had settled among them like dawn, breaking over the horizon. The cubs had chosen her. It was not weakness. It was not manipulation. It was not chance. It was trust. The settlement did not yet understand what it meant, but they could not turn away from it. Something greater had begun. Something that no command, no cage, no law could control. As the sun finally broke free over the horizon, washing the scene in golden light, the human woman stood quietly among the cubs. They pressed closer to her, legs, their tails flicking gently, their eyes soft yet watchful. She did not claim them. She did not need to. Their choice spoke louder than any claim ever could, and in that moment, everyone present, warrior, guard, elder alike, knew they were witnessing something that would be remembered for generations. A bond had been revealed, one that would change the meaning of strength, leadership, and trust in ways they had yet to imagine. The reactions had been fear, suspicion, and anger. But beneath it all, another truth was taking root. Awe. And awe was far more dangerous than fear. The settlement had always been a place of rules, traditions, and unspoken fears. Cages had kept the cubs in line, elders had kept order, and warriors had enforced strength with sharp claws and sharper weapons. That night, all of it broke apart. The cubs had walked free, yet instead of chaos, they brought clarity. Their choice was plain, undeniable, and unshakable. They had left the cages not to escape, not to rebel, but to sit quietly at the door of a human woman. From that moment, everything began to shift. The elders, who had spent their lives shaping the laws of the settlement, found their voices weaker than ever before. Their words, once powerful enough to silence crowds, now sounded hollow. No argument could erase what had been seen with every pair of eyes present. No warning or decree could undo the calm line of cubs waiting outside her shelter. For the first time in many seasons, the elders found themselves without answers. The warriors, trained to trust only power, struggled the most. Some had sharpened their weapons that very night, ready to spill blood if an enemy clan had dared to steal the cubs. Instead, they witnessed a different kind of strength, one without weapons or force. They saw cubs who would stand guard over a human not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. That kind of loyalty could not be commanded. It had to be earned. Slowly, quietly, even the most hardened warriors began to respect what they did not fully understand. The guards who had discovered the empty cages were no longer mocked for their alarm. Instead, they were remembered as the first to see the beginning of something new. Whispers spread among them, not of fear, but of curiosity. Why her? What did the cubs see in her that none of them could? Each guard had their own theory, but none dared speak it too loudly, afraid the truth might vanish if touched with careless words. As days turned into weeks, the change became impossible to ignore. The cubs no longer returned to their cages. Whenever someone tried to force them back, they resisted, not with wild snarls, but with quiet determination. They would slip away, not to hide in the shadows, but to gather again at her side. It was as if invisible threads bound them to her presence. The settlement soon gave up trying. The elders were forced to admit the truth aloud. "They have chosen," one said in a voice heavy with reluctance. The words rippled like a storm through the gathered crowd. It was the first time anyone had spoken it openly. They have chosen her. The woman herself never claimed this choice. She did not boast of it, did not demand recognition. Her life continued as it always had, simple, quiet, steady. She tended her small tasks, walked through the settlement without pride, and never once sought power. But the cubs were always near. They followed her steps, rested at her door, and guarded her in the night. Their presence spoke louder than any, crown or command, could. At first, some whispered of danger. They feared she might rise against them, turning the cubs into a weapon, but those fears faded quickly. She never used them. She never asked them for anything. The bond was not about control. It was about trust. Slowly, the settlement began to change around her. Warriors who once looked at her with suspicion began to nod in quiet respect. Guards who once avoided her path now walked beside her without unease. Even the elders, though still reluctant, could not deny her presence when decisions were made. She had no official role, no title, yet her influence was felt in every choice, every silence. The cubs grew stronger, and so did the bond. They learned discipline not through shouting or punishment, but through her steady calm. They fought less among themselves. They carried themselves with quiet pride. And when danger loomed, when rival clans pressed at the edges of the territory, it was the cubs who stood firm around her, as if guarding the settlement itself through her. It was then that the warriors understood the deeper truth. Strength was not only in the sharpness of a blade or the roar of a battle cry. Strength could be found in trust, in calm, in unity freely chosen. The human had shown them that without ever lifting a weapon. The settlement began to see her differently. She was no longer the outsider living at the edge, no longer the quiet figure tolerated but ignored. She was something more, something they could not name at first. Bridge, some called her. Guide, whispered others. But the cubs had already spoken the truth through their actions. She was theirs, and they were hers. Time moved forward, but the memory of that night never faded. The sight of cubs lined up outside her door became legend, retold in fireside stories and whispered to young ones who asked how things had changed. The elders, though reluctant, began to shape new rules that allowed trust to be seen as strength. The warriors trained with a new understanding, watching the cubs closely, learning from their calm, and the cubs themselves grew into something the settlement had never seen before. Fierce when needed, but steady in their loyalty. They were not bound by cages, but by choice. They carried the quiet strength of the human in every step, every glance, every breath. The settlement was no longer the same place it had been before that night. Fear had been replaced by awe, suspicion by respect, and command by choice, all because the cubs had seen what no one else dared to see, that trust was stronger than fear, and that the human they chose was more than an outsider. The woman never asked for followers. She never wanted power, yet she became the bridge that bound two worlds together, the world of predators and the world of humans. Through her, they discovered that unity was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. And so, when the story was told in later years, it was not spoken with shame or anger, but with pride. The night the cages stood empty was not remembered as a night of fear, but as the night of choice, the night the cubs revealed a truth that changed everything. The choice had been simple, yet it reshaped their world. They chose her. And through that choice, they gave everyone a new path to follow,